Okay, so hello Loz and welcome to Finland for a long time.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
So the name of the game today is that we're gonna speak about you and your journey as a metal vocalist.
Okay.
So are you ready to roll?
Yeah, let's go.
Do you recall when you heard metal music for the first time?
Yeah, I try and retrace these steps and think about the first sort of ever time that I heard metal. I think I was about 13 years old and I'd done some work experience in a music store, and there was a band looking for a drummer, and because I'd done a bit of work experience in the drum department, I could barely play a beat, but a local band had me try out, and up until that point I'd not really listened to a great deal of metal, but I think the first he kind of gave me a cassette tape, and it was Soulfly. So I think the first time I ever heard anything was Soulfly, and then from listening to that, sort of my journey sort of started, and then quite quickly after sort of listening to that, I got into sort of new metal, and then later down the line more sort of metalcore.
So what was like in metal that sort of caught your attention first?
I think for me personally, and it may sound a little cliche, I guess, but I always felt a little bit different from sort of the rest of the kids at school, perhaps. And when I heard metal music, it just spoke to me in that way, you know? Back then as well, it was sort of, you were the kid on the school bus that maybe got spat at or punched for wearing like a Slipknot hoodie or a Korn hoodie, you know? But yeah, there was just something about that, the sort of the imagery and how sort of, especially, you know, stuff like Marilyn Manson and Korn and Limp Bizkit and all those bands, like how it looked to me, it really drew me in, as well as the how heavy it was.
So what made you become a vocalist and pick up a microphone? How did that happen?
I guess vocal is quite instantaneous, you know. As soon as you pick up the microphone, you can start making some sounds into it. And I'm a little bit fickle, you know, like I started to try and learn many instruments as a real youngster, whether it's like double bass, you know, the big, you know, orchestral instruments, or a bit of keyboard or piano, a bit of guitar, and I never stuck to anything. And then I think, as we were saying, as soon as I sort of heard the new metal sound and started listening to bands, I just wanted to be involved but couldn't play anything. So I kind of gathered a few friends that lived on the same street as I did, and we just got in my grandparents' garage and just started like jamming covers and things like that. So I just turned into a singer. I said earlier about this band sort of having me try out on drums, even though I couldn't really play when I was about 13, 14 years old. And I specifically remember at this, we were having sort of a jam session, and I was sort of sat behind the drum kit, and I wasn't really sort of into it, wasn't really feeling it. And I said to one of the guys, they were a bit older than me, and I said, look, I'm not really into this, you know, like, especially at a young age, being like, I think I'm going to leave the band. And the guy was sort of like, all right, you know, sort of, why do you want to leave? And I kind of just remember thinking, like, I think that I just want to be more of a frontman, you know, kind of want to sing. And there and then on the spot, he was like, well, go on then, sing. Yeah, I think I sang something like really cringy, like Backstreet Boys or something like that. And he was just like, oh, you know, you can actually hold a note, so fair play. And that was sort of it. I was just like, yeah. And then I said I started this other little garage band with my friends and just picked up the microphone.
So in terms of like vocalists, were there like some specific vocalists that you looked up to, and were you first like singing their covers and tried to sort of mimic them and then figuring out your own way to do things, or how did that like early vocal evolution start? So
in the early stages of me sort of actually trying to sing, it was As I Lay Dying that were actually like the first band. It might be considered a little bit of a dirty word now, I don't know. But yeah, that was the band I used to just get their CDs and put it on my parents' stereo and turn it up and literally just scream along to his voice. Yeah, bands like Killswitch Engage, All That Remains, Darkest Hour was a huge influence for me. A great band. Like I believe Darkest Hour like hugely underrated, to be honest.
They are.
They have some amazing work early on, some early albums. But yeah, that sort of Kill Switch, All That Remains, Darkest Hour kind of vibe was when I was like, wow, this is like, and hearing sort of the heaviness of that vocal sort of paired with the really melodic cleans. Yeah, I love that sound, and so we used to scream along to that sort of stuff.
So did the UK scene like inspire you anyway?
Not so much. I think when I first heard metalcore as a genre, there was a lot of an influx of US bands that sort of stood out to me. Yeah.
So in terms of like learning to scream, were there like some specific songs that you remember doing over and over again? And were you like sitting in a car or screaming in a shower or screaming in a rehearsal place or everywhere?
It was just really rehearsal space. I specifically remember going out to like a local rock club after sort of I'd gotten into it a bit more and I'd started sort of skateboarding and hanging out with people that were into similar things. And I remember going out to a nightclub and sort of being approached by some people that had heard that I was singing in sort of a garage band, and they were saying like, do you want to try out for our band? And I was like, yeah, sure. And still at this point I hadn't done much screaming. We were covering sort of the Hives or whatever, you know, like just sort of the punk rock classics that you would hear on a rock night out that weren't so much screaming. That's what we were kind of just trying to learn and practicing. So when I joined this other band, like they introduced me to a lot of that stuff. So I was like, cool, well, this band want me to sing for them, so I better start learning. And I literally just put CDs on and just as basically as hard as my body would let me, I would just try and emulate these vocalists that I really liked.
So was Revenants your first ever band?
Yeah, good research there. Revenants was a very early one. The first ever band that I was in was called Fail to Reason, and you know, no one's gonna have heard it or know anything about it. But that
it's not on YouTube.
It'll be on YouTube, I think. We changed our name so it was Fail to Reason, then we changed our name to The Innocent Awaits, and there are some really grainy, horrible early videos of me screaming in those bands. So that was it, really. I just tried to sound like those people, really.
By the time you joined like While She Sleeps, did you already had some kind of like technique for the screaming, or were you losing your voice like all the time in the early days? And did that take like long time to figure out?
Yeah, so I think until I joined While She Sleeps, I'd never really toured properly. So we do like the odd weekends, and sort of the first bands that I was in, that's how we met While She Sleeps. They played a local venue in Doncaster, where I'm from. Okay. And that was how I met the band. And we just clicked instantly. Like the band that I was in at the time, The Innocent Awaits, we liked all the same music. And like I said, like we're just obsessed with sort of American deathcore and metalcore and things like that. And so we just started hanging out, and then we became really good friends, my old band with the rest of the Sleeps guys. And at the time, sort of While She Sleeps were like tiny, you know, they must have been like 15, you know. Yeah. And Sean was like sweeping and shredding even at that early stage, and for a young band they sounded really tight, and we just clicked. Like, and that's really how I then ended up joining the band a few years later, because we were just really great friends. When I finally joined While She Sleeps in sort of 2008, 2009, that's when things started getting quite serious, and then we would start first touring. At that point, you know, it was like, I kind of felt like if I wasn't partying all the time and that sort of thing, that I was doing rock and roll a disservice, you know? So we were drinking and taking drugs, and I was screaming with no technique training, no vocal training whatsoever. And for a while, that was fine, you know? For a while, my body could deal with that when I was young, and that was fine. And then, yeah, as you can imagine, eventually, the more the band progressed and the more writing we did and albums we put out, the more we were touring, and then I started running into problems.
So when you were doing like show after show after show, did that cause you that you were like losing the voice like after each night, and you sort of like struggling through the tour? Yeah,
that was it really. And so yeah, we'd be partying all night, and then, you know, playing shows. I mean, the one thing that's always kind of impressed me, I guess I'd say, is that we never drank before a show.
Okay.
So like even at
you were professional in
even at a very young age, we were like, you know, you're not going to drink before the show. However, that doesn't really count when you drink all night and are still drunk going into, you know what I mean? It's like we still had the mindset of like, we don't drink before a show, but we might have still been drinking at 7, 8, 9 o'clock from the night before. So it's kind of like, but yeah. And that's obviously when I started running into problems. I think it was, so we have The North Stands for Nothing was our first EP. Then we did This Is the Six. And at that point, you know, there wasn't really that many vocal problems happening. It's when we finished the touring schedule for our first album, This Is the Six, that's when I started having problems.
How was it like to record an album? What kind of experience that was?
A couple of our band members, Matt and Sav, they grew up with punk. So we'd recorded This Is the Six and toured it a lot. At that point, our management and the record labels obviously wanted us to be on the road like non-stop.
Yeah.
So we were hammering it and also getting hammered the whole time. And at the end of that cycle, that's when I started with the problems. I remember specifically we were playing a festival in the Isle of Wight in the United Kingdom, and we were it was more of like a indie pop festival, and we were one of the only metal bands on the lineup. Like, as a band, we were really excited about that, to sort of represent the UK at this more pop festival, and we really wanted to put on a good show. And I specifically remember that was the first time I was like, I fucked that up, you know, I messed it up. My voice wasn't doing anything I wanted to. It sounded horrific. It had dropped in pitch. It was very, very hoarse, very dry. And that's when I realised that I was in some sort of vocal trouble.
You had a vocal surgery. Was it like 2013 before Brainwashed album was released?
Yeah. Oh, so this is what I was going to say. So some of our boys are into punk, early punk. And so after I figured out that I might need some surgery, I mean, it all intertwined, so it's hard for me to pick out the exact moments. I went and had a surgery, and they told me at the hospital that, and it was near Christmas that I had the surgery, and they told me, if you want to have a drink around Christmas, because I know it's going to be difficult for you not to, being as you're on tour all the time and you drink a lot, try and stick to red wine, because red wine it's not fizzy, it's flat, and it's a lot better for the vocal cords. Being very naive and stupid, I took that as just drink red wine. So while my friends were out near Christmas drinking pints, I was drinking pints of red wine, and as quickly as they were drinking beer. So it got very, very messy. So after that, I found out I'd need a second surgery. So I had a polyp on my vocal cord from the damage that I had caused by tearing my vocal cords and then screaming on top of it.
Yeah. Sort of typical vocal
surgery
that you have to do.
But then, so what I'm trying to say is, with the bands being into punk and you listen to a Rancid record, they have about 20 songs, but all their songs are like 1 minute long. With a polyp in my throat, we did a 15-track metal record. So that whole record, I've got a polyp. And some days I'd go into the studio and record like a line, like one line, 2 lines. And then we'd be like, you're done for the day. It took forever to record. Why we chose to do 15 tracks knowing that I was in this predicament and having vocal problems, I have no idea. But anyway,
how do you look at that album like afterwards? Are you like satisfied, or would you redo it yourself if you could do it, or?
I mean, I'm very, you know...
Or do you have like very mixed feelings about it?
I have mixed feelings about it, because at the time that I knew I was walking, like I had loads of vocal problems, I didn't know if I was going to come out of a surgery and still have this vocal strength to continue being in the band. And that was worrying for everyone involved, the rest of the guys, myself. I am proud of Brainwash as a record, but as sort of a musician and a vocalist that I'm trying to be now, I'm not necessarily proud of the performance on the record. So I think that like getting through that and being able to put out the record regardless of the trouble that I was having, and then coming back and touring it, even though my vocal problems weren't, you know, that wasn't the end of it, I think is something to be celebrated, really, because it was a very tough time for the band, being quite young and not knowing if I was going to still be able to sing for the band. So coming through that and trying to live with this sort of polyp in there and these vocal problems, but still recording the record and then still being able to tour and getting through that is an achievement for me.
So was that also around that time that you wanted to approach like Melissa Cross, that you need to do something for yourself to sort of not harm yourself anymore?
That would have been the time that I should have gone to seek some help and some training. But I didn't see Melissa Cross for many years after that. I had some help from actually the NHS in the UK, and I know a lot of people from the UK will say that the NHS is terrible, you know, and overstretched and all these things. But I had an amazing team of people looking after me, from the people doing the actual surgery on me to the rehabilitation teams that looked after me. They were amazing. And I still speak to those people today, like via text. They're always there for me, which is really good.
So obviously, like you said in the beginning, you were partying quite a lot after the shows, and you didn't really take care of yourself. But do you nowadays have certain kind of like warm-up routine that you follow from show to show?
Yeah. So like I said, many years after that, I went to see Melissa Cross and took some advice from her and did some sessions. I went over to New York for a week and worked with her, and that really helped me. Also, I was basically like fully alcoholic. So like now I don't drink. So that's been a big change for me with my vocal health. And I think, you know, sometimes you can, there's a lot of sort of our peers or friends in bands out there that can sort of drink quite a bit and still sound really great. But for me, I'm not built like that, you know.
Every vocalist who has been answering on this series have given us a different answer, so it kind of tells that everybody is very different.
Yeah, I think how you're made and how you're built is as different as a personality can be, you know. We're put together slightly differently. We all have different genetics, and I think it depends how you're built. So yeah, for me, like I said, I struggle with acid reflux. It's called silent reflux. So when you eat certain foods and drink certain things, you're breathing acidity through your larynx. But because I'm not got like any sort of heartburn or anything like that, so I don't necessarily feel that it's there. But at the same time as having bad technique and drinking all the time, I had like the acid reflux happening. So that was another thing that I've had to learn to sort of control, take some medications for, which I think for any young aspiring sort of vocalists, it might not be something that you necessarily think about, you know, but maybe if you're finding that you are getting hoarse quite quick, but you are looking after yourself and you do have your technique sort of locked in, you could be struggling from like an acid reflux type thing that might need some attention.
So do you have a specific warm-up routine that you follow before the show? Do you do some kind of scales or?
Yeah, I do basically what Melissa Cross taught me a few years back, which just goes through scales, and just really stretches the voice and warms it up nice.
So do you do that like before every show, or when you are on a long tour, does it get like easier so you don't have to do it every day? Or?
I do that every day now.
Okay.
Usually I'll try and do it before sound check, because that's the first time I'm going to use my voice, and then before I go on, I'll also just go over a few of those scales and make sure I'm still warm. You know, the larynx is a muscle, and sometimes a lot of people just won't think of it as a muscle, even though it is. So if you were a sprinter, a runner, you wouldn't go out there and do a run without sort of limbering up and stretching out. And I think that's exactly the same mindset for your vocal cords. You need to stretch it up and warm it up nice, so that when you go out onto stage, it's not shocked and stressed into doing what you need it to do.
So you already mentioned that reflux, but are there like some specific foods or drinks that you try to avoid before the show, or on the opposite side, something that you have felt that it helps you with the singing and screaming?
Yeah, so you know, acidic foods is all about the pH scale, the pH level. But you know, if you want to adhere to that, as I was told, you know, you need to really reduce the acid that's in your diet. It kind of strips the fun out of life. You've got to stay away from sort of fried foods and fatty foods and high caffeinated foods, chocolates, crisps, all that kind of thing. It's really about living sort of a really healthy lifestyle. I don't tend to do that because, as I said, I'm not drinking, and I think you've got to have something in life, else you just go crazy.
You need to enjoy your life as well.
So, but I think it's about balance, you know. If you know you've got a tour coming up and you want to sound the best, then you know, live a bit healthier on the lead up to that, and it's only going to benefit you whilst you're touring.
Do you drink a lot of water before the shows?
Yeah. I'd say the main things for a healthy lifestyle, a healthy vocal is sleep. If you're ever feeling hoarse, the best thing to do is just shut up. You know, that can be hard day to day to just live like that. I've done so many hours and hours on tour where I have like a thing around my neck or a badge that just says vocal rest, and you just don't talk to anyone. And when I was when I was at the height of all my vocal problems, that can be really lonely. You know, you're already on tour, so you're already away from your family and loved ones. So then staying silent around all your friends and while you're in the venue, and that it can really segregate you and make you feel kind of like on your own. However, for me, it was my fault I was in that position anyway. So, you know, you do what you need to do.
So you have released, was it 6 albums with While She Sleeps so far?
Yeah.
Are there like some specific albums which you could pinpoint from the discography where you have felt that you have taken like big step forward as a vocalist, learned something new about yourself?
Yeah, for sure. So I think during, like I said, after the Brainwash record, which was our 3rd record, like 2nd full length, 3rd record, moving into an album called You Are We, that's when I felt like I started getting more of a grasp on the sound of where I was sounding the best. And after You Are We is So What?
I think so. I would also need to check those.
But there are a lot of vocals on So What where I feel like it's the best vocal I put out up to that point. Felt really good, really strong. I feel like my scream was really sort of resonating and sounding like I was relaxing a bit more and it was sounding more fluid. So What for me was the record where I was like, wow, I can really hear a difference in the changes that I've made now to sound better.
So, but basically you have been evolving with every album that you put out in a way.
Yeah. And I think that like for a long time, I didn't necessarily respect what I had in front of me. Not that I didn't respect that we had a fan base, because that's what I've always loved about being in a band, is the community that we've managed to build surrounding our band. It's crazy to me that I got into nu metal and metalcore because those genres of music spoke to me. And I really loved the community surrounding that. I loved going out to my local shows and meeting up with people that I didn't see it like much and being like, oh, you were at that other gig, you know. And I think what While She Sleeps has managed to do is create a community around it that I'm really proud of. So I think for a long time I didn't really let that sink in, that like I'd managed, like as a band we managed to create that. And then as you're maturing and getting a bit older and putting out more music, then you start realizing that I have a responsibility to sound good. People are spending their hard-earned money to come and see us play, and without them coming to see us play, we won't get to do what we do. So that's when I started taking it a lot more seriously and taking responsibility over people want to see us play, so I need to sound the best I can.
Self Hell was the 6th album of you that you put out last March.
Yeah.
Were there like vocally some new things that you tried which you haven't done before?
Yeah, for sure. So as I've said, like early days of metalcore, like While She Sleeps, were obsessed with it. You know, bands like Parkway Drive and all the other bands that I've mentioned, we were obsessed with it. And then for me personally, like metalcore got so heavily oversaturated for so long, it's like turned into a subgenre all of its own, and there's thousands and thousands of bands now. So with the Self Hell record, I think we just wanted to do something that pushed ourselves out of our comfort zone and try some new things with that. Step away from metalcore for a little while when you've got so many bands doing it and doing it well, you know. And we just wanted to try something new. So there's some different flavors in there and some things that we were like a bit like, ooh, do we do this, you know? And a lot of the time for us as a band, you know, as much as it's about the fan base, it's about us in the studio. And if we're having fun and sort of scaring ourselves into new territories, then we feel like that's the way to go. So yeah, Self Hell was like a different journey, but actually probably one of my favorite times recording in the studio as a collective.
I have few questions left, and the second last one actually goes that what were your parents' reactions when they heard small Loz screaming their lungs out for the first time?
My parents have always been really supportive. And I've got them to thank for sort of who I am with that, because my mum was sort of into dramatics and she was a dancer and those sorts of things. And my dad, you know, my middle name's Floyd after Pink Floyd, so he was always trying to introduce me to new bands. And I remember when my parents separated, like sitting in the car with my dad and showing him like emo bands that I loved, stuff like Finch and The Used and stuff like that. And you could tell, like, my dad's a really big fan of sort of Alice in Chains and stuff like that. So you could tell he was a bit like, you know, but we found mutual ground within the stuff that we were showing each other that we sort of both liked. So they've always been supportive. My mum's favourites are always like the ballads, you know, the slower, more gentle songs. She's like, oh, that's my favourite. But I think they're both very proud of what we're doing now. And, you know, from being a kid and it just being a hobby to now actually making it to the point of like, this is what we do for a job and has been for 10 years plus. They get it now and they always come and see us play and, you know, enjoy watching us play live.
Last question, and this is most likely the one that gets asked from you on streets and fan meetings many times, but any kind of advice that you would like to give to a young metal vocalist?
Don't take your vocal cords for granted, because they're the only ones you've got, and it sounds simple, but if you're not living kind of healthily and getting some technique advice, you could run into a lot of trouble. It's so much easier nowadays to just jump on YouTube and find someone who's maybe been through the same situations as me and can advise you on the way to do it. When I was coming up, there was no YouTube videos on how to scream, you know. Melissa Cross was the only person really doing it back then, and I just had a DVD. And because I was so young when I got hold of that, I didn't really understand all the modes she was going through and the exercises. So just take some time to learn that. And one of the biggest things for me when I was coming up was like, I used to meet vocalists all the time that would sort of have the fry technique down and scream at a bit of a lower volume. And in my mind, I was sort of like, fuck that. You know, if it's not as loud as you can do it, as heavy as you can do it, and as passionately as you can do it, then what's the point in screaming? Because for me, I was like, you're showing how much you care about it by giving it your all. Whereas now, it's not that I don't care about it any less than I used to, but I think relaxing the body and letting the vocal flow out as opposed to forcing it out with everything you've got is the key. If you can create those sounds and try and relax a bit, then you're not going to clamp up your vocal cords and try and push the air through a closed larynx. That's the key, because that's what I did for so long. When you're giving it everything you've got, with all the force that you have, you're creating problems. Your larynx is trying to move, but you're clamping it together and then trying to push the vocal through that. And that is just the wrong way to do it. You want to relax and try and let it flow out. Hopefully that'll help some people out there.
Luckily, there is many YouTube clips available today, which wasn't when you started.
Exactly. So yeah, just go online and get some tips. During the lockdown as well, when COVID-19 was a thing and people were wearing bin bags around their faces and stuff, I started a podcast called The Throat Podcast, and there's maybe 6 or 7 episodes there talking to all different sort of styles of vocal. We got Andrew Newfield from Comeback Kid, and then we've got Neck Deep and Def Havana, and you know, and it's something that's kind of fizzled out that I think I'm thinking about bringing back and talking to more vocalists, you know, about their journey. But if you want to go and, you know, maybe listen to that, it's very interesting. Yeah, Throat Podcast. It's on Spotify.
Thanks a lot for taking the time to do this with me.
No problem. Thank you.